The sun was folding itself into the horizon when Maeve Carter reached the edge of the Red Hollow Ranch. The sky burned copper and rose, wide and unapologetic, the kind of sky that made a person feel small or brave enough to keep going anyway. Maeve paused at the fence line, one hand resting on the warm wood, dust clinging to the hem of her long skirt. She had walked farther than she meant to, chasing quiet after a day that had given her none. She was used to taking up space. Her body had taught her that early, soft, powerful, undeniable. But tonight the land seemed to take up space too, stretching endlessly, as if daring her to step fully into it. She did. The fence creaked behind her as she crossed onto the ranch proper. Wind brushed her curls back from her face, carrying the scent of sage and horse and something else, leather maybe, or heat. Maeve inhaled slowly, grounding herself. She didn't know why she felt pulled here, only the turning back would feel like a lie. A low sound reached her ears, not threatening, measured, a voice carried on the wind. Easy now. It wasn't meant for her, she realized. It was meant for an animal, steady, calm, intimate in a way that made her chest tighten. She followed the sound. Near the corral stood a man so large she thought, for one dizzy second, that the dusk was playing tricks on her eyes. He was tall, unnaturally tall, broad as the barn behind him, shoulders filling the space like he belonged to the land itself. A white cowboy, sun-browned and solid, one massive hand resting against the neck of a restless horse. He murmured again, voice low, almost reverent, "I've got you." The horse settled. Maeve stopped where she was, suddenly aware of her own breathing. The man turned then, slow and deliberate, like he sensed her presence rather than saw it. When his eyes found her, the world seemed to narrow. They were pale, startling against his weathered face, curious, not sharp, assessing, but not unkind. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Maeve felt it then, the strange electric awareness that had nothing to do with fear. It was recognition, though she had never seen him before, as if some part of her had been waiting for this exact moment without knowing why. "Evening," he said finally. His voice was deeper up close, resonant, the kind that settled in the bones. He didn't move toward her, didn't crowd her space, despite the fact that his sheer size could have made him intimidating. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was, offering distance like a choice. "Sorry," Maeve said, then frowned at herself. She wasn't sorry. She lifted her chin. "I didn't mean to wander onto your land." He studied her for another second, eyes flicking briefly to the fence, then back to her face. "You didn't wander. You walked with purpose." That made her pause. Most people looked at her and made assumptions about her confidence, her softness, her strength. Few spoke to the intention behind her movement. "I'm Caleb Holt," he added, inclining his head slightly, "ranch owner, and you are—" "Maeve Carter." Her name hung between them. Something in Caleb's expression shifted, not surprise, not confusion, something quieter. He repeated it under his breath, barely audible. "Maeve." The way he said it felt different than hearing it spoken before, slower, weighted, like he was tasting it, committing it to memory. She swallowed. "Is there a problem?" "No," he said quickly, then softer. "No problem." The horse snorted, breaking the moment. Caleb turned back to it, finishing what he'd been doing with gentle efficiency. Maeve watched without meaning to, the careful way his massive hands moved, the ease in his body, the way he seemed to belong here without needing to prove it. When he finished, he stepped away from the corral, boots crunching against the dirt as he approached her. He stopped several feet away, close enough that she could see the faint scar at his jaw, the crease between his brows that suggested a man who thought deeply, perhaps too deeply. "You look tired," he said, not as an observation, but as a concern. Maeve almost laughed at that. Instead, she nodded. "I am. Red Hollow has a way of calling people who need rest. Didn't know that until it started happening." "And what do you do when it calls you?" she asked. His gaze dropped to her hands, dusted from the walk, then lifted again to her eyes. I listened. The wind shifted. The light softened. Caleb took a breath, then said her name again, this time louder, but still gentle. Maeve. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't a line. It was a promise forming, whether either of 'em understood it yet or not. If you'd like, he continued, there's a house near the ridge, coffee still warm. You're welcome to sit a while before dark. Maeve considered him, the land, the quiet pull in her chest that felt less like risk and more like a rival. She nodded once. I'd like that. As they walked side by side toward the fading light, Caleb didn't rush ahead. He matched her pace, every step deliberate. And as the sun finally disappeared beyond the hills, he whispered her name one last time, so softly she might have imagined it, but she didn't think she had.
The house near the ridge was older than it looked, built low against the wind, its porch worn smooth by decades of boots and waiting. Inside, lamplight cast a honeyed glow across rough-hewn beams and wide windows that framed the darkening land like a promise kept. Maeve stood just inside the doorway, hands clasped loosely in front of her, taking in the quiet. It wasn't an empty quiet, it was a listening one. Caleb moved past her to the stove, his height forcing him to duck slightly beneath the beam. He poured coffee with unhurried care, the steam rising between them. He didn't ask questions yet. He seemed to understand that some stories needed warmth first. Maeve sat at the small table, the chair solid beneath her. She noticed the way the house held her without complaint, no creaking protest, no subtle suggestion that she didn't fit. The thought surprised her with its tenderness. Caleb set a mug in front of her, then took the seat across the table. Even sitting, he seemed impossibly large, his knees angled carefully to give her space. He wrapped his hands around his own mug, but didn't drink. They sat like that for a moment, sharing the simple sound of breath and the faint hum of insects outside. "You don't talk much," Maeve said gently. Caleb's mouth curved, just slightly. "Only when it matters," she nodded, accepting that. "I talk too much when I'm nervous." "Are you nervous?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. "No," she said after a beat. "I don't think I am." That earned her a longer look. Not the kind that stripped or weighed, but the kind that noticed. Caleb seemed to catalog her presence, the steadiness of her shoulders, the way her eyes held his without apology. "You're not from around here," he said, finally. "No, but you didn't come by accident." Maeve exhaled. "No." The truth sat heavy and familiar in her chest. She had carried it a long way. "I left a place that stopped feeling like home. I didn't know where I was going, just away." Caleb nodded once, as if that explained everything. Sometimes that's the truest map. She smiled at that, small but real. Outside, a coyote called, distant and lonely. Maeve's fingers tightened around her mug. "I'm used to being looked at," she said quietly. "People decide who I am before I ever speak." Caleb's brow furrowed. "And they're wrong." The certainty in his voice startled her. "You don't know me." "I know enough. You walk like someone who's learned to carry weight and keep moving anyway." Something in her chest cracked open at that. She hadn't realized how rarely anyone named her strength without turning it into a spectacle. Silence returned, but it had changed. It leaned closer now. Caleb stood abruptly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Maeve flinched before she could stop herself. He noticed instantly, his movements slowing, gentling. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." "It's okay," she replied, though her pulse told another story. He hesitated, then reached for a blanket draped over the couch. "It gets cold up here after sundown." He didn't assume. He held it out, waiting. Maeve accepted it, their fingers brushing for the briefest second. The contact sent a quiet shock through her. Not heat, not hunger, but recognition again, like the land itself acknowledging her presence. As she wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, Caleb turned away, giving her privacy she didn't ask for, but deeply appreciated. "You can stay the night," he said, facing the window. "There's a spare room. No expectations." The words were careful, respectful. Maeve stood, the blanket pooling around her curves, and moved to stand beside him. The window reflected them faintly, her softness, his sheer size, side by side without imbalance. "Why?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was lower. "Because when you walked onto my land, it felt like something long awaited arrived." Her breath caught. "That's a dangerous thing to say to a stranger." He met her gaze, unflinching. "I know." The honesty there, unpolished, unguarded, made her trust him more, not less. She nodded once. "I'll stay." The guest room was simple and clean. Caleb left her at the door, not crossing the threshold. "I'll be up before dawn. Coffee will be ready." "Thank you," Maeve replied. As she lay in the bed later, the quiet pressed in, not heavy, but deep. Through the open window, she could hear Caleb moving in the other room, his presence a steady rhythm rather than an intrusion. She closed her eyes. In the early hours, half dreaming, she heard his voice again, soft, reverent, unmistakably real. Maeve. He didn't know she heard him, but the way her heart answered told her everything was already changing.
Morning came slow and pale, easing itself over Red Hollow like a held breath finally released. Maeve woke before the sun fully cleared the ridge, the room washed in silver-blue light. For a moment she lay still, listening. The house breathed around her, wood settling, wind moving through grass, a distant clink of metal. She wasn't alone. The awareness didn't make her tense, it grounded her. She dressed quietly and stepped into the main room. Caleb stood at the counter, back to her, sleeves rolled to his forearms as he worked the coffee grinder by hand. The simple domesticity of it struck her harder than anything the night before. This giant of a man, careful with small motions, present. He sensed her again before she spoke. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Morning." He turned, eyes softening when he saw her. There was no surprise there, just acknowledgement, like he'd expected her to still be here. That certainty warmed something deep in her chest. Coffee was poured, bread toasted. They ate standing at the counter, sharing space without touching, a quiet tension humming between them like a live wire just under the surface. "You didn't run," Caleb said lightly. Maeve arched a brow. Was that the expectation? "No," he admitted, "just a possibility." She sipped her coffee. "I don't run from places that feel honest." Something in his jaw flexed. He set his mug down carefully. "Then I should show you something." He led her outside, the morning air cool and clean. They walked past the corral, past grazing horses, farther than she'd gone the night before. The land sloped downward into a wide, open stretch where the earth dipped suddenly, revealing a deep ravine carved by years of water and time. Caleb stopped at the edge. Maeve joined him, peering down. The sight stole her breath, not because it was dangerous, but because it was raw, unhidden. "This land," Caleb said, "looks solid until it doesn't." She glanced at him. "You saying it's fragile?" "I'm saying it tells the truth. Erosion only shows what was already there." Maeve felt the words settle into her bones. "I built this ranch with my father. When he died, everyone expected me to sell, said the work was too big for one man." "And?" she asked. "And I stayed," he said simply. "Not because I'm strong enough, because I didn't want to abandon something just because it demanded more of me." Maeve turned to him fully. "You talk like someone who's been abandoned." Caleb didn't deny it. His gaze stayed on the ravine. "People leave when they realize I'm not easy." She understood that too well. "They don't leave because you're difficult. They leave because you're deep." He looked at her then,
really looked at her. The space between them felt charged, heavy with words unspoken. "Why are you here, Maeve? Not on my land, in this place, with me?" The question wasn't a challenge, it was an invitation. She took a breath. "I got tired of shrinking, tired of making myself smaller so other people could feel comfortable." Caleb's hand flexed at his side. "You shouldn't have to do that." "I know, now." The wind picked up, tugging at her skirt. Without thinking, Caleb stepped closer, not to claim, but to shield. His body blocked the worst of the chill, his presence steady and warm. Maeve became acutely aware of the difference in their sizes, not as imbalance, but as contrast. Her softness against his solidity, her curve against his straight lines. He didn't touch her. That restraint was louder than any grab could have been. "Maeve," he said, her name slower this time, like he was laying it between them with care. "I don't whisper promises I can't keep." Her throat tightened. "I didn't ask you to promise anything." "No," he agreed, "but I need you to know I don't invite people into my life lightly." She met his gaze, unwavering. "Neither do I." They stood there, the ravine yawning beside them, the land bearing witness. Maeve felt something inside her shift, not collapse, not rush forward, but open, like ground finally ready to be planted. Caleb took one step closer. Still no touch, just proximity, choice. "If you stay," Caleb said, voice low, "it won't be quiet forever." She smiled then, slow, sure. "I didn't come here for quiet." The air between them thickened, heavy with the promise of what could come. Caleb lifted his hand, stopping just short of her cheek, waiting, asking. Maeve leaned in the final inch herself, resting her forehead briefly against his chest. The contact was innocent, electric, enough. He exhaled, a sound like relief and restraint all at once, and whispered her name again, this time not like a secret, like a vow waiting to be spoken.
The days that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them named, but both respected. Maeve stayed, not as a guest who tiptoed, nor as a woman who made herself convenient. She stayed like someone who belonged in her own skin, moving through the ranch house with quiet assurance. She rose early with Caleb, learned the language of the land by watching, how the horses shifted before weather changed, how the wind meant different things depending on where it came from. Caleb watched her too, though he tried not to make it obvious. She filled spaces without overwhelming them. Her laughter came slow, but when it did, it stayed. She asked questions that made him pause before answering, not because they were intrusive, but because they were exact. One afternoon, clouds rolled in heavy and dark, the sky pressing low. Maeve stood on the porch, arms folded, watching the horizon like it might answer something for her. "Storm's coming," Caleb said from behind her. She nodded. "I feel it." They worked together without discussion, closing shutters, moving feed, checking fences. At one point, rain came down hard and sudden, catching Maeve in the open yard. She laughed, startled, hair already soaked as she ran toward the barn. Caleb reached her in 3 long strides. He caught her arm, not roughly, but firmly, and pulled her under the overhang just as thunder cracked overhead. The sound vibrated through them both. For a moment they stood too close, breath mingling, rain hammering down like applause they hadn't earned yet. Caleb's hand was still on her arm. He realized it at the same moment she did. The contact wasn't accidental anymore. He loosened his grip but didn't fully let go. His thumb rested against her skin, warm, grounding. Maeve looked up at him, rain tracing paths down her cheeks, eyes steady and searching. "Caleb," she said softly. He swallowed. "Tell me to stop." She didn't. Instead, she placed her hand over his, smaller, softer, but sure. The contrast sent a visible tremor through him.
He inhaled slowly, as if pulling himself back from a ledge. "I won't cross a line you don't invite me to," he said, voice low and controlled, "and I won't pretend I don't feel this." Maeve stepped closer, not enough to erase the space, but enough to redefine it. "We don't want to rush, but we don't want to pretend either." Thunder rolled again, closer this time. Caleb nodded once. His other hand lifted, hovering near her waist without touching, asking, waiting. Maeve closed the distance herself, pressing her body lightly against his chest. The contact was full, undeniable. His breath hitched, but he didn't grab her. Instead, his hands settled at her sides, firm and reverent, as if holding something precious rather than claiming it. Their foreheads touched. Rain roared around them, but the world narrowed to breath and heat and restraint. Caleb whispered her name, slow, deliberate, like he was anchoring himself to it. "Maeve." She answered by tilting her head just enough that their noses brushed. The intimacy of the almost kiss was sharper than the kiss itself might have been. Her lips hovered near his, close enough that he could feel her breath. "Promise me something," she murmured. "Anything," he replied, too quickly. She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Don't make me small, even by accident." His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with resolve. "I won't," he said. "I see you too clearly for that." The honesty in his voice broke through her last layer of caution. Maeve leaned in and pressed a single, slow kiss to the corner of his mouth. Not claiming, not yielding, choosing. Caleb froze for half a second, then exhaled deep and steady. He didn't chase her lips, he didn't deepen it. He simply stayed, hands firm at her sides, grounding them both. When she pulled back, the air between them felt changed, charged but clean. They finished the work in silence after that, rain tapering off into a soft drizzle. Inside, Maeve changed into dry clothes while Caleb busied himself at the sink, his back to the hallway, giving her space even now. Dinner was quieter than usual, not awkward, aware. That night they sat on opposite ends of the couch, the distance intentional, a shared boundary held together rather than apart. "You ever think about what comes next?" Caleb asked, eventually. He considered the question carefully. "I think about whether I'm worthy of it." She smiled, tired but sincere. "That's the wrong question." He turned to her. "What's the right one?" "Whether you're willing to grow with me," she said. "Not ahead of me, not over me." His gaze softened, something deep and earnest unfolding there. "I am," he said, "if you are." Maeve leaned her head back, eyes closed briefly. "I am." Later, as the house settled into sleep, Caleb lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. Across the hall, Maeve breathed slow and even. The knowledge of her presence was both comfort and temptation. He didn't cross the hall. Instead, he whispered her name into the dark, not like a plea, not like a claim, like a promise he intended to keep.
The night before, the storm broke clean, like the land had decided to let go of something heavy. By morning, the sky was a clear, endless blue, the kind that felt earned. Maeve woke with a calm she hadn't known in years. She dressed slowly, choosing comfort over armor, and stepped outside just as Caleb was tightening a saddle strap. He looked up when he sensed her, always that quiet awareness, and something in his face eased when he saw her still there, still choosing this place. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "I did. Best I have in a long time." He nodded, satisfied, then hesitated. "There's a lookout past the North Ridge. Thought you might like to see it." She smiled. "I'd like that." The ride was steady and unhurried. Maeve sat behind him on the horse, close enough to feel the warmth of his back, her hands resting lightly at his waist. Caleb rode carefully, conscious of every shift in her weight, every breath against him. The intimacy of it pressed in, not sexual, not yet,
but deeply physical in a way that demanded trust. When they reached the lookout, the land opened up beneath them in a vast, breathtaking sweep. Maeve dismounted slowly, boots crunching against stone, and walked to the edge. Wind lifted her hair, tugged at her clothes, but she stood firm. Caleb joined her, massive frame casting a long shadow beside hers. "This place," he said, "is where I come when I need to remember who I am." Maeve turned to him. "And who are you, when you're honest?" He met her gaze without flinching. "A man who's learned restraint the hard way. A man who knows his size can either protect or overwhelm." She nodded. "And I'm a woman who's been overwhelmed before," she said quietly. "Not by force, by being unseen." The words hung between them, not as accusation, but as truth. Caleb took a slow breath. "Then let me say this clearly," he said. "I don't want to own you. I don't want to take up all the air in your life." He stepped closer, careful, deliberate. "I want to stand with you." Maeve felt the ground steady beneath her feet. She reached for him this time, placing her hand flat against his chest. His heart beat strong and even beneath her palm. "Then don't whisper it anymore. Say it." Caleb's breath caught. He covered her hand with his own, huge, warm, sure. "Maeve Carter," he said, voice carrying in the open air, "I want you, not to possess, to choose, again and again, if you'll have me." Her eyes burned, but she didn't look away. "I will," she said, "as long as you keep choosing me too." The kiss that followed was inevitable and still careful. Caleb bent slowly, giving her time to pull away if she needed. She didn't. Their mouths met in a deep, grounding kiss that spoke of patience rather than hunger. Maeve rose onto her toes without thinking, one hand sliding up to curl into the back of his shirt. The kiss deepened, not frantic, not rushed, but intense enough to steal breath. When they finally broke apart, foreheads resting together, the world felt quieter, as if it were listening. They returned to the ranch at dusk, the air golden and soft. Inside the house, the familiarity of shared space felt different now, charged but safe. Dinner went untouched for a while. They stood near the hearth, the fire low, shadows dancing across the walls. Caleb cupped Maeve's face, thumbs brushing her cheeks with reverence. "Tell me if I move too fast," he said. She smiled, heart full and steady. "I will." This time when he kissed her, it was fuller. His hands explored her back, the curve of her waist, learning her shape like a language he intended to speak fluently, but respectfully. Maeve responded in kind, fingers sliding beneath his shirt, feeling the strength there, the warmth, the restraint that never left him. They stopped before the edge tipped into something neither wanted to rush. Breathless, Maeve rested her head against his chest. "I don't feel small here. I feel held." Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head, voice rough with emotion. "That's all I ever wanted to give you." Later, as night settled in, they lay side by side on the couch, limbs touching, no need to claim more. Outside, the land stretched wide and patient. Caleb whispered her name one last time, not in the dark, not to himself, but to her. And this time, it wasn't a promise waiting to be spoken. It was one already kept.